Test, test. Test, test. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
Se mete, que agarre bien las roscas. Dale a Dios. No meten bien las cuerdas. Todo el tiempo las meten chuecas. ¿Cuál es tu sacate?
Sí, porque es fertilizante. Sí, ahí donde están, en la oficina. Ahí donde están y en la oficina. Ustedes ahí, todos esos. Están los sacates y de la oficina también. Sí, tengan cuidado ahorita cuando entren los carros, ¿no? Ahí, espérense. Dale vuelta a la troca y para que la mano atrás. No pasa para la seco. La maqueta, ¿no? Voy a poner esto. Cuando le dan la vuelta y la meten allá donde cortaron las plantas y ya le echan de Pedro Ness. Es que es abono, señor, es abono, son todas las plantas.
I don't think it's the same one.
A un lado está el metal. 50 galones o 50 litros.
Es que acaba de llegar la madre. No es que acaba.
Tenía 3 rayas, pero esta entonces lo que estaba yo. Ya venía.
Vamos a llevar a familia. Vamos a sacar.
Ya también.
So, yeah, that's.
Es que lo hagan. Se acaban en una hora. Ya. Está bien, con esto de- no se rato, no, sí, personal, claro, chingón y arreglado. Eso fue el foro, fue los copias. Estos pinches huesos. Viene la madera. No, no, no. Es mismo. Vamos al revés. Está más duro. Ellos tenían. Madre central. No, pues yo sí reconocí la cerradura. Ayer me iba a echar y se olvidó. No sé cómo lo cagonearon estos cabrones. Se la pusimos otra respuesta y me dijo, ¿en serio? ¿Plástico qué? Hacer plástico, dejamos el plástico. No te puedes comprar unas par de pilas, pero...
Yeah, basically.
Fíjate, 75 una sola. Ahí está ganando. Sí.
One. Guys,
Ese es de Bluetooth por la cámara.
oh,
Yeah, I usually that's actually why we have
No, you see, next week, I think my mother has one of them. Oh, no, yeah. Right. First row could be.
Oh my gosh. Where do you want?
I'll sit on the hyper edge.
Second row. Oh, your mama's here. Yeah.
Before we start,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming.
I was trying to remember, graduate curriculum.
That's kind of my dad didn't get it since he didn't get it. Yeah. Okay. 89 is when I graduated from high school. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you being here.
Oh, that?
Well, I'm just right here at the store. Yeah, I was just like, I'm on it. Oh, it's coming up. Yeah, 6 weeks, too.
Hi, Victoria.
Are you gonna reopen anything?
How are you today?
Yeah, I'm retired.
He has shown me a few times. We haven't used music.
What's that?
Show me. Yeah. You ever show me on like your picture?
Rabbi
Oh, yeah,
said,
yeah, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Broken that. Oh, my. One of my, yes. Okay. We have an umbrella. Yeah. You can illustrate it. How are you? Good. How are you? I am good. We'll see you.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know if he'll change his teeth.
That did the glasses as a kid.
One of my kids. Oh, sorry. I have that in my. We're back. We are we gonna do this, and then when it's Brian's turn, we're gonna go. You know what we found out? And then maybe, you know what we found out? I was telling you, she always did. Yeah, I didn't know that. Oh.
One more time before we get to the grave side. Watch your footing, continue around the open grave. Make sure not to lower until we are at center. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can remind everyone to please turn off your cell phones. Where is she?
I don't really.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are a few extra chairs. Please don't be bashful. The family has been seated, so please take a seat if you'd like.
I'm good.
In this hour of sadness, let's hear the voice of the psalmist who brings us the message of God's nearness and our fellowship with him in light and in darkness, in joy and in sorrow, in death as in life. Please join me in Psalm 23 in English. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Our God and God of our ancestors, our rock and our Redeemer, 1,000 years in your sight are as a passing day, an hour of night. Our generations come and go, while you endure forever. We are always in your hand, O Lord, in death as in life, trusting in your love and in your decisions. O merciful Father, Lord in heaven, strengthen those who mourn the loss of John Zall. Help them to look beyond this moment, to realize that death can never destroy the bonds of everlasting love. Sustain them with the knowledge of our faith that you do not abandon souls to the grave. You, O Lord, have taught us the way of life. Through you, our refuge, we gain eternity. And let us all say, Amen. I'd like to begin my personal remarks this morning before we hear from members of John's family with a statement from the smallest big book in Judaism. It's a book known as Pirkei Avot, which literally translates as the chapters of the fathers. That doesn't make any sense to anyone. A better translation is sage advice. It's essentially a collection of statements made by some of our greatest sages who took time away from their study of Jewish law and decided to opine on how to be a good neighbor, how to live life, what qualities one should develop in trying to navigate the day in and day out tasks of living. And this particular statement, I've never used it at a funeral before. And it struck me, and I wanted to put it out there, and then we'll unpack it a little bit. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Rabbi Tarfon said, the day is short, and there is much to be done. The laborers are sluggish. The reward is great, and the master is insistent. You are not obligated to complete the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. Whatever it is you have done, your reward will be commensurate with that. Your employer is dependable. He will reward you for your labor. And know that the righteous will be rewarded in the days ahead, in the time to come, in the future. Tarfon was offering these words as a moment of optimistic advice to Jewish people living in Israel under the Roman occupation, when living life as a Jew was terrible. And people were wondering, why bother? What is going to happen to all of the things that I've tried to do? Who is going to see them completed? Because I'm probably going to be executed or killed in a battle. And Rabbi Tarfon says, you don't have to worry about the end result. You have to start, you have to do the work, you have to just start the task. And there will be others who will be commissioned to finish it if you do not manage to do that on your own. This was seen as a message of optimism for the people living at that time. And I believe it is in the spirit of optimism that we are brought out this morning. To those who may not have known John really well, this day might be somewhat of a surprise. But if you knew him well, you expected to be here. He had been battling health challenges for a good number of years, even from the age of 12. Some quietly and privately, and some, especially near the end, a bit more openly. At every stage of his life, he met every challenge resolutely and bravely. His record of accomplishments speak for themselves. But most importantly, anyone who knows him knows that he had a total joy for life, a love of life, and that was really inspirational. He personified the words of the psalmist who said, Lo amut ki ahya, I will not die, but live. And indeed, John lived life. He lived it on his own terms, and he did it rather well. The question is, how should we remember him? All of us know of his deep love of baseball. I know he also loved football. For some reason, I couldn't find my purple Rockies tie. So I'm wearing an orange tie because the Broncos were his new favorite team here. But everyone knew about his love for baseball, something that was ingrained in him as a passion early on. He would travel to see various teams prepare for the season at spring training. He attended fantasy camps. And many of you may have heard of his childlike and total awe when he had the opportunity to meet one of his baseball idols, truly one of the great baseball players of all time, Stan Musial, at the Baseball Hall of Fame. He was practically speechless and had to be brought over to say whatever it is he wanted to say to him. Many of you know of his love for football, and all these things animated him. His deep love, not only of sports, but of performing. He had perhaps a small, but for him, a very important life that centered on acting and performing. And he could regale you with stories of the people that he met. And I don't know if any of his children are going to share the story, but I know that he took great pride in being insulted personally by Don Rickles on stage at one of his performances. In Jewish tradition, a tree is often a symbol and a metaphor for a human being. The trunk of the tree is solid and strong, upright and firm. Its branches grow right from the trunk itself, and they in turn have branches of their own. The tree may sway in the wind and bend this way or that, but the best of them never break, but remain strong and true. Indeed, I think this describes John Zall. Like the trunk of the tree, John always tried to be firm and strong. Maybe a little too firm, and maybe a little too strong sometimes. But he was truly a man of great integrity. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. He did have high standards, but it is true that he had high standards for himself as well. He would be disappointed if you didn't do your best, and he would probably take the time to let you know that. And this was most especially true within the confines of those nearest and dearest to him, his beautiful family who loved him for all these years. But if he set high standards for others, he also set high standards for himself. He encouraged others to meet expectations, and he expected himself to meet them as well. And that was key to understanding him as far as I have learned. He simply wanted people to demand the best of themselves. He commanded excellence from others because he demanded it of himself as well. within the confines of his beautiful family, his wife, Barbara, and we're going to hear from two of his children, Brian and Edie, in just a moment. Today's loss is very acutely felt. They made it very clear to me what a wonderful provider he was, how he would do anything for his family. Everything John did, he did for his family. They have lost a husband, a father, and a grandfather. His wife lost a life partner. His children have lost an advisor and sounding board. His grandchildren have lost a wise and generous grandfather. He taught those nearest and dearest to him by example the most important lessons, the kind that you do not always find in textbooks or in horn books or restatements of the law. And like John, I too am a lawyer. I probably liked it a lot less than he did when I was practicing, but I know my way around horn books and restatements of law. And sometimes you're just not going to find what to do expressly written. Some lessons are best learned and are best taught by example. And John went out of his way to try to do that, again, in his own way. I'm going to call upon members of his family, two of his children who are going to share a few words. First, we'll call on Brian. Then we'll hear from Edie. Then we're going to have a special set of remarks from a close friend and colleague, Ted McNamara. Todd, I was just testing. Todd.
Thank you, Rabbi, for those perceptive comments and generous comments for my father. How does one eulogize a father? I've watched many others before me, the Dumans, the Zalls, the Coopers, the Tenenbaums, the Mandels, the Cohens, the Perlmutters. The list is heartbreakingly endless. Stand where I am now, and in this unthinkable circumstance, speak eloquently with trembling voices from their broken hearts. All the while, they were still raw from the immediacy of the loss and unaccustomed to the vacancy left by their departed father. I truly understand what strength and courage they showed us in their time of sorrow. And I truly question whether I'm equal to this task, and I beg your indulgence. So how do I eulogize my father? Someone who was half responsible for my physical existence, whose presence and guidance left an indelible mark on my essence of being. How does one capture the significance of such a person and convey it to people who knew my father in their own unique ways, personally and professionally, and still do this peaking honor justice? The answer is that it's truly impossible, and yet I must try. I'll start by saying my father taught me foundational principles that have helped shape me into the man I am today. My father was a man who, along with my mother, is responsible for my moral compass, my thought process, my career choice, my physical appearance, and my very perception of the world. My father taught me that hard work and education were the keys to a successful life. My father taught me the meaning of the word tenacity, which basically means unceasing grit and inner determination to achieve a goal. A lesson that has helped me persevere through some of the most mentally and physically challenging moments of my life, like this one. My father taught me that patience is an important component of maturity, and that logic and simplicity are the tools of effective problem solving. Additionally, my father showed me that mentoring others, whether in the practice of law or along in their journeys of life, was a gift to be given freely. He routinely surprised me with his wit and his span of knowledge. His laughter, although rarely heard, was a tuning fork that brought my soul comfort. For when my father was happy, the universe was in balance. Now, that is not to say we were equal in all things. We disagreed often, and sometimes his contribution was to be the demonstrative suggestion that the better path was to be more than what was being modeled. But despite disagreements, we always had the healing touchstone of our mutual love and affection for one another. You don't have to agree with someone all the time in order to love them. And I loved my father all the time. My father was a fighter. He had a closed head injury when he was hit in the head with a baseball as a child that resulted in scarring on his brain. As a result, he had a seizure disorder, a burden that would challenge him and his loved ones every day of his life thereafter. But he fought on tenaciously. He had a successful law practice. He meticulously wrote down everything so he could have access to it in the event of an episode. He married a loving wife. He, along with my mother, raised children and enjoyed watching his numerous grandchildren grow and flourish. My father and mother took the family on amazing vacations in Hawaii and Arizona, provided a beautiful home, and allowed us the freedom to make our own decisions and to chart our own paths in life. My father believed that experience was the best way to learn, and he didn't focus on your failures, but on whether you had the inner fire to get back up and fight on. Surrender was not an option. Quitting was a moral sin. Tenacity, tenacity, tenacity. My father fanatically pursued his passion of the very instrument that created his long-standing burden, baseball. I disliked baseball for what it did to my father physically, for what it took from him, from us, for how it dominated his attention and scheduling commitments. But in time and with age, I realized what it meant for my father. It was an escape to a place where the players are forever young and where hope runs eternal every spring. It was my father's paradise, and perhaps a reminder of how he once was before his injury. How could I spoil or resent the escape for someone so dear to me? I used to tell my father when he was dedicating himself to baseball more than I felt his family obligations. Spend more time with the family. No Rockies will show up for your funeral or give your eulogy. Well, I'm wrong. I never dreamed my father would live into his 80s. Such a long time when you look at the number, and yet so brief when you review it in retrospect. When you love someone as much as I love my father, you worried incessantly about the loss of them, and I worried incessantly. I've been haunted preparing for this overwhelming moment, the death of my father, for decades. Yes, decades. I've dreaded receiving the late night phone call from my mother telling me he had a major heart attack or car accident and that he's gone. I've lived with the dread flowing from the anticipated pain of losing someone so dear to me for many, many years, almost to the point where I now cannot accept that it has actually happened, that he's simply gone. I've long watched my father eat whatever he wanted and not exercise. He knew the family cardiac history, and in his later years, he knew of his declining medical state. But in his true tenacious form, my father kept right at eating ice cream, cookies, and sweet rolls for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, year after year after year. And of course, I, along with my family, tried numerous times to alter his path. We pestered him endlessly to eat a salad or go for a walk. In more recent times, I surrendered to the notion that he was living the life he wanted, as he wanted. It was selfish for me to impose my values upon it. I still worried, but I let him be himself. Another life lesson, courtesy of my father. That said, I'm now going to let you in on a little secret as to how I took my concerns with my father's longevity into my own hands, and perhaps explain why he was able to eat as he did and not exercise for so long. You see, when I was a young boy, my father would take me to get my haircut at an old school barbershop called Sebring. They sold a proprietary shampoo that had a sweet smell, was ruby red in color, and now the secret. Sebring is long gone. And yet I have kept a bottle of that proprietary shampoo tucked away in my various homes for 30 years. I truly believe that if that bottle of Sebring shampoo never ran out, then my father would live on. As an adult, seeing and smelling the shampoo or whiff of Aramis cologne reminds me of a time when my father had strength, optimism, and vitality. What lies we tell ourselves to get us through our anxieties. Now, some final thoughts. I beg your indulgence. Please raise your hand if you've lost a parent. It's comforting to see that my family and I are not unique in our suffering today, that the weight on our hearts is something others have experienced and, more importantly, endured patiently, tenaciously. It's part of the human condition, but it doesn't make it any easier. We are now all joined at the heart in our loss, my pain, your pain, our pain together. For those of you who have had the good fortune of not raising your hand at this moment in time, I'm sorry to remind you of what you already know and maybe project some of my long-standing anxiety onto you. But your day to stand in these mourners' shoes will come. I remind you of that unpleasant reality, not to be cruel, but because I implore you to use this moment to reflect on how lucky you are to still have both your parents on this earth. Don't waste it. Tell them how you feel. Get over your differences. For this is what the future holds for all of us. Over the years, I routinely told my father how I felt, that I love him, that he is my hero. Consequently, I have no regrets in that area, for I know he knew of my love, no matter our distance, no matter our disagreements. I'll now demonstrate for you how this expression of love before it's too late activity works in real time. I want to use part of this moment to pay tribute to my mother, Barbara Zall. She is a saint. She is patient, kind, loving, and above all, understanding. She has remained dutifully by my father's side through sickness and in health, and those words really do not do justice to how she conducted herself in a marriage of almost 60 years. She's the glue that keeps our eccentric, eclectic family together, and I love her eternally. Everyone be nice to her. I mean it. Be nice to her. She's a kind and sensitive soul, and she deserves all the love in the world. I love you, Mom. I want to express my gratitude for everyone that came here today, and to extend the gratitude also to the people who are attending remotely over the internet. Your words of remembrance and condolences have helped me and my family immeasurably. I want to thank Jimmy Cohen and Feldman's Mortuary for their compassion and assistance during this challenging time. Our community is lucky to have Jimmy Cohen in it. He truly lessens the burden of loss, and as my father would often quip, the Cohens are the last family to ever let you down. I also want to take this moment to thank my sister Edie Zall for her patience, guidance, and support in this very difficult time. Her experience and expertise has helped steward my mother and I through this seemingly unending storm. Lastly, as a loving tribute to my father, a final familiar phrase that seeded his joy and ignited his passions. Play ball, Dad. I love you. Play ball.
Ditto. I'm the jokester of the family. I'm John's firstborn and favorite child, excuse me, daughter, Edie. Brian did a beautiful job. I didn't quite write mine the way that he did his. Mine focuses on my relationship with my father, which all of us daughters know that daddies and daughters, it's a bond that you can never truly define. My dad was the first man in my life. When I was younger, he treated me like I hung the moon, and I never had an unmet need. As I got older, I spent a lot of time and energy trying to make him proud of me, but I wasn't a boy, so I wasn't an athlete, so I wasn't really focused in school either, because I always figured that I'd get married and someone would take care of me. Mark, where are you? There you go. But I wasn't really paving a path for my future, and I became very rebellious. And I know it caused a lot of pain to my mother and my father from about 13 to 23. Don't listen to this, my kids. And I wasn't the apple to my father's eye in those years. But after a particularly rough breakup that I had, taught me that I needed to start depending on myself to take care of myself. And I remembered that my dad repeatedly would tell me that in the end, they can take away everything from you, but they cannot take away your education. And I knew that Brian was a favorite of my dad's because he played ball, he got good grades, he went to Tulane, he was in a fraternity, he went to law school, he was basically John Jr. And every time that my dad talked about him, he would just beam with respect and gratitude. So I decided that to earn my father's respect, I needed to respect myself. And I had an epiphany while I was driving back from Greeley College to home one evening. And I told my dad it was my Blues Brothers moment, because my dad would share all those great movies with us, Blues Brothers and Blazing Saddles, all those fun movies that we don't watch anymore. So reciting random lines from the movies and trying to guess what they came from, that was like a fun thing that we all did together. So I told him, Dad, I'm on a mission from God. And I dove into graduating from college and moving into my grad school years. And just before I got my master's, my dad took me to Lola's Deli, where he shared a memory with me. He told me that years before, when I was coming down the stairs, before my prom date arrived, he saw me as a woman for the first time in his life and in my life. And he felt so sad because he knew I was grown and I didn't need him anymore. But then I slipped and I fell down the stairs and I cussed on every stair. And he knew at that moment, he told me that I was still his little girl. And he was crying when he told me that story. And I felt like I hung the moon in his eyes again, because usually I never saw him as nostalgic or emotional. That's how he was. After he had a seizure, he would be very nostalgic and emotional. And my dad is one of the reasons, actually the reason, that I got certified, board certified in brain injury. So I could understand him better. I mean, this was a man who, when my boyfriend, who is now my husband of almost 30 years, let him know with my mom that he wanted to make a personal and societal commitment to me, my dad replied, "What the heck does a societal commitment mean?" And I laughed, because every time I had a new boyfriend or got serious about him, my dad would tell me, hey, I'm not going to take him seriously unless and until he makes a societal commitment to you by giving you a ring so that everybody in society can see his commitment to you. And I had shared that with Mark when we went ring shopping, and he purposely used my father's own words to show him how serious he was. And he says, "What the heck is a societal commitment?" But Mark was undaunted, and he finished by telling my dad that he loved me and he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. And my mom gushed, "Johnny, we have an engaged daughter." And my dad said, "Oh, that's great. Can I watch the rest of the game now?" So emotion was not something that he showed. But he did show me. He showed me when he walked me down the aisle, holding tightly onto my hand and freezing when Herb Galchinski asked, "Who gives this woman in marriage?" He didn't move. And I had to actually say to him, "Dad, give me to Mark." He went, oh, sure. Gave me away. He showed this with his daily texts that he'd write to me, asking about my life and sharing what was going on in his. He showed me every time he was grumpy, and he'd flare his nostrils, because that's how we all knew he was mad. And I'd push on him and I'd go, "Wee-oo, and he'd smile every time I'd get out of that mood. Nobody else could do that. Nobody. He showed me when he nicknamed his son-in-law and his grandkids, because you only get a nickname if he loved you. So we have Sam the Eagle as my husband, AJ is my daughter, Mongo is my son Kellen, who's watching in Alabama now. I think Alabama. Yes. and Hans, the bike rider. I've always been Chav, and his most recent that we gave him were Daryl, because he earned that when his legs and his feet were really, really swollen, because it's Bigfoot's real name in those Progressive insurance commercials. And he called himself and would sign off on every email and text, Snoop Daddy. He showed me every time that he would part ways, we would part ways, he'd give me his special bear hug sound. And he started doing that when we were kids. He showed me by doing his goodnight ritual that he did to us when we were little with my kids, when they were little. He did that too. That same special ritual that I made sure to do in the hospital every time we would leave. And when he was still cognizant and I did it, he said, "Though that's getting old." And I said, "Yeah, so are we, Dad, but we're never too old for this." I'm really glad that I did it with him the last time I saw him alive. So, Daddy, your Chav says, and I love you.
All of you know that John loved his family and friends and baseball, usually, but not always in that order, deeply and fiercely. I first met John 44 years ago as a baby attorney. My first job out of law school, he was a partner, and I became his associate. And John taught me that his sense of ethics and professionalism were what made a good lawyer. You can have the talent, but if you don't have the professionalism and the ethics, it really doesn't count. And he had a abiding sense of ethics and professionalism. Brian, you mentioned that your dad said experience was the best teacher. I had worked up a trial for John in U.S. District Court, so I'd prepared the witnesses, I'd prepared all of the directs and cross examinations, but I thought I'll sit here and observe with John at counsel table. And Judge Mate said, "Counsel, call your first witness." John talked to me and said, looked at me and said, "It's all yours, partner." And he always loved to tell a story that he never saw anybody turn as white as a sheet as I did on that first time in U.S. District Court. But your dad was an amazing, amazing teacher, and I loved him dearly for it. Obviously, you all know about his love for baseball. We'll talk about that more in a bit, but as an associate and then later when I left and became a partner in another firm, we became best of friends and developed a close love for one another. And that was wonderful. But even more wonderful was the relationship that our family, known by the Zalls as the Macs, and the Zalls developed. We shared almost every Christmas Eve together at our house. We shared almost every Thanksgiving at the Zalls' house. We traveled together to Beach House in North Carolina. We traveled to California for a variety of trips. And we became an extended family of the Zalls, and they became one of the Macs. We shared anniversaries, birthdays, funerals, birthdays and births of grandchildren, and a host of amazing and wonderful activities over the course of those years. Baseball was a common bond between John and myself. We spent hundreds and hundreds of hours watching baseball games, first at Mile High Stadium and later at Coors Field. And John knew that I was a passionate Dodger fan, even though we shared season tickets with the Rockies. And he grudgingly agreed on several occasions to come with me to California to watch the Dodgers. The trade-off was, and so I'll own up to this, your dad wasn't big on health foods, as you know. So after I would take my morning run and workout, I would bring John back his breakfast repast. of 2 cans of Coke and a big slice of chocolate cake or a fudge brownie. And with that bribe, he would come to the Dodgers games, sit beside me, and grudgingly root for my team. So I owe him that. The McNamara family has been absolutely blessed to have John in our lives. Me, my wife Christina, who broke her foot and couldn't be here today, but would have. Our daughter Heather and Alyssa all send their love and respect to John and to the Zalls. His passing has left a huge, huge hole in our hearts, but it's going to be filled with many joyous and beautiful memories of laughter and love. Your dad was a unique person. We loved him dearly. God bless him. I'd like to close with one of John's very favorite songs, which I have sung together with him hundreds and hundreds of times over the 44 years that we knew one another. So for those of you that are seating, if you can stand, and for those of you that are watching at home, please let us close with singing John, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back, for it's root for the Rockies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
To thank everybody for really painting a very complete picture of John Zall. And I'm a Dodger fan too, by the way. So the cast is going to be lowered. In just a moment, we're going to do a ceremony called Kriya, which is tearing of clothing, or in this case, perhaps a ribbon on someone's clothing. And we're going to make a blessing to which you're all going to answer Amen. And then we're going to have an opportunity to fill the grave. And first, we'll ask the family who wishes to do that to come forward and do that. And then anyone here who would like to do that will be invited to do so.
Now?
Not yet.
I want everyone to imagine in ancient days, people didn't have closets filled with suits and dresses. And they didn't have a wardrobe. Maybe they had their regular toga and the tunic and their dress. You rip one, it's a tremendous investment. And it's seen not only as a financial investment, but also as a psychological investment of the sound of the tear and the action of that. It's supposed to be very cathartic. And we hope we can accomplish a lesson together. ירשוף העפר על הארץ כשהיה, והרוח תשוב אל האלוהים אשר נתנה. Thus, returns to the earth as it was. Spirit returns to God's spirit.
One of the traditions with filling the earth, number one, this is called Chesed Shel Emet, altruistic kindness. We have no expectation that John can do this for us. So we're doing this for him out of a simple sense of obligation. Number two, the tradition is not to hand the shovel to the next person. Place the shovel back into the pile of earth. Let each person take the shovel on his or her own.
I would have sat there. I would have been like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching on the podium.
Yeah. I think I got that. Sorry, this is what
Not gonna give this to you. Just don't confuse that.
Hatsur Tami Michol, Darachav El Mishpat, En Manav Ein Avel, Sadik Yashur is Hatsur Tami Michol, Po Al Miyomer La Matif Al, Ashalit Bamata, Bama Al Mimidu Machaya, Marit Shaol of the Al, Hatsur Tami Michol Maaseh, Miyomer La Mataaseh, Omer Viosa, Chesed Chinam Lanu Taaseh, Ubischut Hana Ekad, Kesa Hakshiva Vaseh. Tzadik b'chol derachav hatzur tamim erachapayim u'malei rachamim chamol nabuchus nalavot uvanim kelecha adon aslichot v'arachamim Adam iben shana yihye elef shanim yichya ma yitra lo kolo haya v'yihye baruch dayan ha'emet meimit u'mechayeh Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach yihi shem Adonai mevarach V'yirachum yecheber rabam lo yashchit v'yirbal yashiva po v'lo ya'ir kol chamato. We're going to ask John's family, wife Barbara and son Brian, daughter Edie, to say the words of the mourner's Kaddish. They're going to say the Kaddish. That's the obligation that mourners have. Our obligation standing here is to answer Amen to the Kaddish. And Amen is just a simple three-letter word. It's actually a contraction of other words that translate into God, El, Melech, ruler, Ne'eman, trustworthy. That even at this moment when we're mourning the loss, as Brian so beautifully said in his eulogy, the challenge of really trying to put forth any kind of coherent set of thoughts at this particular moment is echoed by Jewish tradition that recognizes the ability to stand up and say the words of Kaddish, you are great and your name is great, is very difficult. And since Brian already asked, is anyone else here has lost a parent, we all understand what that challenge is about. So the Kaddish is going to be said, and never underestimating the power of a three-letter word, amen or amen. We're all going to answer amen at the appropriate time. I'll help guide you in that as well. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Amen. V'yolma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute v'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach leolam ulomei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'olma v'imru amen Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Going to make a memorial prayer in both Hebrew and English. El malei rachamim meshochenu b'amromim, hamitzei menucha tachat kanfei ashechina, b'malot kedoshim u'teorim, כזוהר הרוקיע מזהירים את נשמת יעקב מתת בן שמואל ואסתר שהלך לעולמו. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו, אנא בעל הרחמים. אסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני ונחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר אמן. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of John Zall, whose Hebrew name Yaakov Matis, the son of Shmuel and Esther, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember the many worthy and righteous deeds that he performed in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of our lives. The Lord is his portion. May he ever rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. We're just going to do one more thing before we return to our cars, but I want to make an announcement that a condolence call can be made this afternoon at the home of Lori and Marty Duman at 3 Cannon Drive in Greenwood Village, 80111. That'll happen after the service and interment here, and it will last throughout the afternoon till about 4 p.m. You don't have to stay the whole time, but your presence, of course, for that visitation would be a source of comfort to John, a blessed memories family. We're going to form a double line. Some people are already facing one direction. We'll have other people this way facing, I don't know if that's north, south, east, or west. I'm not good at that. But well, okay, I don't know where I am.
Where are the mountains?
Where are the mountains? I have no idea. That way? I thought they're over there. Well, if the mountains are there, it's west.
No, the
No,
mountains
mountains are there. That's south.
Okay, you see, even you're confused and you live here.
South.
As his family makes their way through this double line, where each of us, not the family, each of us is going to say words of comfort to them. So wait 1 second. Okay. Please repeat after me and direct these to John's family. Hamakom,
Hamakom,
Yenachem,
Menachem,
Etchem,
Menachem,
Betoch,
Betoch,
Sha'ar,
Sha'ar,
Avelei, Tzion,
Zion,
Yerushalayim.
Jerusalem.
May God comfort you among all who mourn in Zion and for Jerusalem. And we all say, Amen. You may return to your cars.
Thank you, Rabbi.